Welcome. You've arrived in a quieter place. Let the day fall away now. Let the noise outside soften like footsteps fading behind stone walls. Tonight you'll wander through forgotten corridors where time left its sandals, and memory still breathes gently in dust and parchment. There is no rush here, no deadlines, no loud voices. Only the soft rhythm of the past, told slowly, with care. This is your moment to rest, to lay your thoughts down beside ruins and let your heartbeat follow the pace of ancient winds. Because tonight you will fall asleep to stories older than empires. Not dramatic tales of kings and wars, but quiet fragments, small truths, delicate facts too often left behind. Together we'll visit lost cities, cracked tablets, echoes of rituals long ceased, each one a whisper of life before life looked like ours. So breathe deeper, let your eyes grow heavier, and allow your body to soften as we begin this gentle journey through 100+ ancient truths, each one a stepping stone towards sleep. Long before maps knew the names of rivers, there was Sumer. And in the cradle of Mesopotamia, people pressed reeds into wet clay to remember things. Grain counts, debts, stories of gods who bled starlight. The oldest known writing system, cuneiform, was not poetry at first, but inventory. A reminder that civilization began with the quiet need to remember. Ancient Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of intelligence. They preserved it carefully in jars, while the brain was removed through the nose. Discarded like a forgotten thought. And yet they built pyramids. They mapped stars they loved. Perhaps wisdom lives where we least expect it. The Great Pyramid of Giza was once sheathed in polished white limestone. It gleamed in the desert sun, a radiant mountain for the gods. Now eroded, soft-edged, its brilliance still flickers in imagination. Time takes polish, but not wonder. In the Indus Valley, cities had underground drainage and standardized bricks. While Europe still slept in scattered tribes, they built for hygiene, not just ceremony. A quiet testament to the dignity of clean water and careful planning. In ancient China, the earliest kites were made from silk and bamboo. They rose not for play, but to send signals in war, to measure distance, to summon the wind. Even in battle, there was beauty in flight. The world's first peace treaty was signed between Egyptians and Hittites, etched in stone for eternity. It begins not with threats, but with the words, "There shall be peace and brotherhood between us forever." Stone cannot bleed, but it can promise. The Babylonians could track Jupiter's motion with math so precise, we still study it. They watched the sky like scripture, calculating paths of gods with broken tablets and unwavering awe. Let your eyes grow heavier now. These facts are not sharp. They are soft moss on ancient ruins, meant not to wake you, but to carry you. Somewhere beyond the noise of modern life, there are traces of a world where sandals pressed into wet clay, and morning began not with alarms, but with incense smoke curling into a rising sun. In ancient Babylon, the streets were narrow and shaded. Market stalls buzzed with quiet barter. Dates, wool, fish caught from the Euphrates, each carried home in woven baskets to stone courtyards that opened to the sky. Above them, the hanging gardens may have bloomed. Perhaps they never existed. Or perhaps they thrived, hidden behind palace walls where vines climbed terraces and water whispered from above. The truth is uncertain, but in some distant corner of memory, they are always in bloom. Elsewhere in the Andes, before the Inca had their empire, quiet farmers etched patterns into the earth. The Nazca lines, colossal birds, spiders and spirals, meant not for ground-dwelling eyes, but for the gods in the sky. They walked the lines barefoot, in ceremony, in silence, writing prayers in footsteps. In the deserts of Egypt, an obelisk still casts its long shadow, pointing skyward as if in defiance of time. It was carved not just to honor pharaohs, but to catch the light, to split the sun, to prove that stone could speak. On the island of Crete, where the Minoans danced with bulls and painted their walls in crimson and cobalt, there were rooms with no doors. Only passageways that wound like thought, inviting one to get lost and maybe to discover something within. The women there wore layered skirts and sacred snakes on their wrists. Their goddesses were not quiet. They stood bare-chested in the center of frescoes, watching with eyes that have not blinked for 3,000 years. History is not always told with swords. Sometimes it is sewn in cloth, brushed into pottery, whispered in lullabies that never made it to parchment. Let yourself drift with them now. Each breath is a page, each heartbeat a lantern flickering down a corridor of time. You are safe in these ruins. You are welcome among these ghosts. There is a temple in Malta older than the pyramids, its stones rounded and worn like riverbed bones. They say women once led the rituals there, that they sang songs to the moon and offered bread in bowls carved from limestone. There were no kings, only the curve of the earth and the patience of time. And in the city of Mohenjo-Daro, long before the name of Rome was whispered, streets ran in perfect grids and homes had private wells. No golden idols, no grand tombs, just the quiet dignity of planned living. It was not a kingdom, but a rhythm. The Olmecs carved colossal heads from single slabs of volcanic rock, eyes wide, lips full, silent sentinels whose names are lost. Some weighed over 10 tons, moved with no wheel, no draft animal, only the force of will, of community, of hands that believed in permanence. In ancient Mesopotamia, they brewed beer thick and sweet, drinking it through straws from communal jars, a drink for the gods, for the workers, for the dead. There was no separation then. What was sacred could also be simple. A tablet found in Nineveh lists complaints. A man's poor service, a shipment delayed. It is perhaps the world's first customer review. Proof that even beneath ziggurats, people sighed, rolled their eyes and wanted things done right. And far to the east in ancient Japan, they whispered to the trees. They left offerings not in temples, but at the base of pines and rivers, believing spirits moved through bark and wind, not brick and fire. History was not always loud. It was often a murmur, a child asking questions, a mother weaving, a hand smoothing sand over a burial mound. You are not required to remember every detail. Let the stories float above you, like stars whose names you never learned but still trust to guide you home. In the heart of Syria, long before modern borders, stood a city called Ebla. Its archives held thousands of clay tablets, names, trade routes, wedding agreements, songs. Not carved to boast, but to remember what mattered day by day, who was born, who owed grain, who loved whom. In those same lands, the city of Palmyra once shimmered like a mirage. Palm trees, marble columns, and a queen named Zenobia who defied Rome with words as sharp as steel. She spoke 4 languages, wrote history, then vanished into the folds of empire. Sometimes history goes silent, not because it was unimportant, but because someone chose not to listen. In the far west, the people of ancient Britain built Stonehenge without iron, without mortar, dragging stones across hills with nothing but belief. Its purpose? Still unknown. But perhaps it wasn't built to explain. Perhaps it was made to feel, to stand beneath stars and feel small in the best possible way. Further east in Persia, the gardens of Pasargadae whispered another kind of power, not the domination of land, but the cultivation of beauty. Symmetry. Water flowing in 4 directions, mirroring paradise. The Persians understood that even in empires, peace begins with a tree bearing fruit. In the libraries of Alexandria, scribes copied scrolls by oil lamp, trying to trap knowledge before it blew away. But flame took it anyway, and still the dream remains, that all wisdom might one day be gathered, not to control, but to understand. And so here we are, thousands of years later, lying in darkened rooms, letting these facts settle like ash on our skin. Not memorized, but felt. Not every story carved into stone was about kings. In the ruins of Pompeii, we find graffiti scratched onto walls, declarations of love, boasts of drinking, simple notes like "I was here, I loved a girl, beware of the dog." It wasn't grandeur, it was humanity, left behind in ash. They had kitchens with bronze pots. They baked bread stamped with the name of the bakery. Some loaves were found still enough frozen in time by Vesuvius, a final meal never eaten. And before the eruption, there were dinners, candles, laughing in courtyards, children learning to read, lives that never asked to be remembered, only lived. In ancient Africa, in the kingdom of Kush, queens called Kandaki ruled with grace and fire. They led armies, signed treaties, built pyramids smaller than Egypt's, but just as eternal. They were not shadows of pharaohs, they were their own light. Further south, in Great Zimbabwe, stone walls rose without mortar, stacked by hand with a builder's patience. No gold encrusted their halls, yet their architecture whispered knowledge passed not by scroll, but by craft. And in the valleys of Anatolia, Çatalhöyük blossomed with no palaces, no kings, no war. People lived shoulder to shoulder in mud brick homes with shrines inside. They buried their dead beneath the floor so that every step was taken above memory. Perhaps civilization does not need a throne. Perhaps it only needs people willing to live with one another and remember their dead kindly. Now rest your thoughts beside theirs. Your breath joins a chorus older than language, older than nation. You are not an outsider to history. You are its continuation. Long before cathedrals cast shadows across cobblestones, people built shrines from stone, from bone, from firelight. In the forests of northern Europe, groves served as temples. No brick, no priest, just the wind threading through leaves, and the hush of reverence beneath trees that knew more than men. In Greece, gods walked beside mortals. They loved, they fought, they envied, they wept. And so their temples rose, Doric columns framing open skies, altars blackened by ash and oil, statues with lips curved in knowing silence. To worship was not just to kneel, but to ask the universe, are you listening? In Rome, they built aqueducts that carried water for miles, not just to drink, but to purify. Bathhouses became sacred, steam replaced incense, marble replaced wood. But the yearning for ritual never faded. Even the act of washing one's hands became a prayer. In India, temples like Khajuraho were carved not only with gods, but with the full range of human longing. Dancers, lovers, mothers, monks. A whole life etched into stone as if to say, all is sacred, even desire. And in the Americas, the Maya tracked Venus with such precision that their calendar rivaled our own. Not to count days, but to align themselves with the breath of the cosmos. They built pyramids in jungles where every stair echoed starlight. Myth was not a story, it was a map, not of places, but of meaning. Tonight, you walk those paths. Not with sandals, but with sleep. Not with offerings, but with openness. Let the gods of the old world bless your breath. Let their temples welcome you, not to worship, but to rest. There are cities we no longer know how to pronounce. Ugarit, Tikal, Elam. Places whose names were carved in stone, then softened by time until only wind could speak them properly. In Ugarit, a forgotten port on the coast of Syria, they found a tablet inscribed with the oldest known alphabet, a step between pictographs and letters, between image and breath, the beginning of writing that sounded like voice. They spoke into clay, and centuries later we still hear them. In Tikal, rising from the Guatemalan jungle, temples peak above the canopy like stone teeth. They were aligned to solstices, calibrated not by compass, but by shadow and sun. No king could have designed this alone. It took generations of sky watchers, bricklayers, prayers whispered to the wind. Beneath their cities, the Maya buried treasures with their dead, painted pots, obsidian blades, seashells that had traveled farther than most men. Even in death, there was movement, a continuation. In Anatolia, in the ruins of Hattusa, lion statues still guard broken gates. Their teeth dulled, but their stance eternal. They were meant to frighten enemies, but now they only watch stars. And near the Silk Road, in the ghost town of Nia, they found wooden tablets tied with string. Personal letters, requests for food, apologies. One simply said, I miss you. Not every artifact gleams. Some are quiet, a comb, a child's toy, a spoon held for so many years its shape molded to a single hand. These are the pieces history forgets, but they are the ones that feel most human. As you lie in the dark, let these remnants gather around you. They are not cold. They are warm with the touch of those who came before you, who also lived and waited and hoped for rest. In the flickering candlelight of ancient shrines, even silence had a form. A priest in Thebes might wake before the sun, not to speak, but to cleanse, to pour water over sacred statues, to anoint stone lips with oil, to dress gods in linen as if preparing a guest for dinner. In these slow rituals there was comfort, a rhythm, a meaning larger than a single life. In Japan's ancient Shinto traditions, shrines were not permanent. Every 20 years they were rebuilt entirely. The same structure, the same wood, renewed again and again. Because divinity did not live in what was old. It lived in what was lovingly repeated. In the deserts of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans placed turquoise and feathers within walls they built by hand. Each stone was selected, turned, fitted without mortar, as if the land itself deserved precision. They lived in cliffside dwellings high above the ground, where the wind could tell them when to plant and when to wait. In ancient Ethiopia, Lalibela, entire churches were carved downward into the earth. Not built up, but revealed from the red rock below. It was not enough to worship on the surface. They believed faith should be hewn from the bones of the world. Elsewhere in small villages, rituals were simpler. A mother grinding grain before dawn, a father lighting incense for ancestors, children setting flowers near doorways to honor passing spirits. History remembers empires. But what holds the world together are these repeated kindnesses, unseen, unsung, but eternal. You are lying now in the same stillness those ancient people once honored. You do not need a temple. You are already sacred. In the ruins of Herculaneum, books were once reduced to ash, but not lost. Deep in the Villa of the Papyri, scrolls carbonized by volcanic fire were preserved not in ink, but in shadow, their words blackened, their meaning waiting to be uncovered by the breath of centuries. To this day, scholars unroll them, layer by layer, with light more delicate than a whisper, seeking fragments of lost philosophies, poems, recipes, truths once shared over wine and laughter. There is power in what survives, not in glory, but in silence. In ancient Ireland, before written records, the laws were kept in memory. Brehon's wise men and women recited judgments like verses, passing justice through speech, through tone, through the rhythm of breath. They carried civilization in their mouths. In South America, the Inca had no alphabet, but they tied knowledge into chords. Quipus, knotted strands of wool, held census data, tax records, even stories. A tactile archive meant to be read by fingers. Every knot was a word, every thread a sentence, and meaning passed from hand to hand, not page to page. And in Phoenician harbours, letters were born, not just to record, but to spread, sailing with cedarwood and glass, carried by traders who spoke the beginnings of every alphabet we know today. Language did not evolve in silence. It sailed, it traded, it survived. You, too, are an inheritor of this quiet persistence. Not a scholar, not a priest, just a soul willing to listen as the embers of history glowed gently in the dark. Across deserts, forests, and oceans, there were paths walked not by conquerors, but by travelers, merchants, pilgrims, and dreamers. The Silk Road was not one road, but a breathless network of footsteps and hooves, linking China to Rome, Persia to India, dream to coin. Along its length, silk shimmered in the hands of emperors, while spices perfumed the air of cities never named in books. Ideas travelled farther than goods. Buddhism rode caravans. Mathematics passed in palm leaves. Stories jumped from tongue to tongue. It was not only gold that flowed, but wisdom. In ancient Arabia, frankincense was more precious than silver. Caravans moved through scorching sands guided only by stars and memory, bringing scent to temples and warmth to midwinter homes. Even the land whispered with trade, footpaths etched into hills, river routes marked by stone cairns, shrines built along the way to thank the unknown. In West Africa, camel caravans crossed the Sahara, carrying salt from the mines of Tagaza to the golden cities of Mali. Salt, so ordinary now, was once wealth enough to weigh in gold. It preserved, it healed, it mattered. And in the frozen forests of Scandinavia, before the Viking raids, there were quiet craftsmen etching runes into stone and carving boats not for war, but for fishing, for wandering, for reaching out to whatever came beyond the mist. History remembers empires, but the world was stitched together by quiet steps taken without fanfare. You are walking those paths now, not with sandals or ships, but with breath, soft, even, enduring. In ancient times, architecture was not simply construction, it was communion, a conversation between earth and sky, between human hands and the eternal. In the city of Petra, rose-red temples are carved into cliffs, doors tall enough for giants, silent as cathedrals, but made not from blocks, but from the mountains themselves. A city sculpted, not stacked. When the sun hits the treasury at dawn, it glows as if it remembers how the desert once sang. In the great city of Angkor, temples rise from jungle like forgotten gods. Angkor Wat, the world's largest religious monument, mapped the stars in stone. Its towers mirrored the peaks of Mount Meru, home of the divine. Not one brick misplaced, not one carving meaningless. Even the walls tell stories of battles, myths, and dances. In Persia, domes began to curve overhead. Geometry was not decoration, it was devotion. Each tile, each line, a whisper of perfection, meant to mirror the vast, unreachable order of the universe. To enter a mosque or ziggurat was to step into a pattern older than time. And in Rome, concrete was poured into miracles, the Pantheon's dome still uncracked, still watching the sky through its open oculus. It was a temple to all gods, because the Romans knew one shape could hold many truths. Even in the far Pacific, on Rapa Nui, stone faces were raised from volcanic rock, the Moai. They gaze inland, not toward the sea, as if guarding the souls of a people who never left. These were not idols. They were memory made permanent. Architecture was not a wall. It was a breath, held, measured, released into eternity. Tonight you are inside such a breath, sheltered by histories you can't see but can feel. Let them be your ceiling now. Let rest be your sanctuary. Long before microscopes or stethoscopes, healing began with the earth. In ancient Egypt, doctors recorded treatments on papyrus scrolls, hundreds of remedies from crocodile bite salves to spells whispered to bones. They believed the body was a river and illness was a blockage in the current, so they drained, soothed, realigned, not just with herbs but with incantations and incense. The physician was not just a scientist. He was a priest. In China, the pulse was not merely counted, it was read. Each beat told a story. A flutter in the left wrist could reveal sorrow. A drop in rhythm might signal a broken heart. Balance always was the goal, between yin and yang, between hot and cold, between what was seen and what remained hidden within. They used acupuncture, fine needles guiding the body's energy, like tuning an invisible harp strung inside the skin. In Greece, Hippocrates wrote, "Let food be thy medicine." He taught that health came not from miracles, but from moderation. Rest, clean water, a cool breeze, a walk beneath trees. Even then, doctors knew that silence could heal. In India, the practice of Ayurveda measured wellness not by pain, but by harmony, of breath, of digestion, of thought. A turmeric poultice, a warm oil massage, a prayer murmured to the rising sun. It was not about defeating disease, it was about remembering wholeness. And across the Americas, shamans blended herbs with song, smoke with story. The willow tree gave bark that calmed fever, the ancestor of aspirin. The body was never separate from the soul. And illness was not an enemy, but a teacher. You are lying still now, as they once did, beneath woven blankets by candlelight, while someone who cared placed a cool cloth on their forehead. You are not alone. The world has always held its breath for those who need to rest. In the ancient world, death was not the end. It was a passage, a door gently opened, a journey begun in silence. In Egypt, the dead were wrapped in linen and dreams, not merely buried, but protected. Amulets were laid across their chests, words of protection painted on the inside of coffins, so the soul could remember its name in the world beyond. The Book of the Dead, a guidebook not for tourists, but for travelers between lives. Each spell, each prayer, a step toward eternity. In Mesopotamia, they believed the afterlife was a dusty shadowland, not terrifying but grey. So families left food and drink for the dead to sustain them. Even kings did not enter the beyond without bread. And in ancient China, paper money, clothes, and even models of servants were burned, not out of cruelty but of generosity. They believed the smoke carried the gifts to the afterlife. Graves were not endings. They were messages sent to the next world. The Etruscans carved tombs like homes, with beds and furniture, because they believed death was a kind of coming home, not away from life, but deeper into it. In the high Andes, mummies sat upright in circles, wrapped in woven cloth as if listening, as if still part of the community. And perhaps they were. To die was not to disappear. It was to return, to the soil, to the stars, to the rhythm of the world's oldest song. You rest now in the same quiet they once prepared for, not with fear but with reverence. You do not fall asleep. You descend gently into a sacred remembering. In every ancient corner of the world, music rose before words. Before stories had endings, they had rhythm. Before gods had names, they had drums. In Sumer, musicians played lyres strung with gut and gold. They sang not for crowds, but for the heavens. Hymns carried upward on thin, trembling notes meant to move the stars. In the hills of Ireland, bone flutes whispered into the mist, carved from the remains of deer. Not morbid, but sacred. The spirit of the animal still singing in wind. In Egypt, harps curved like the crescent moon, plucked by fingers trained not just in sound, but in intention. Melodies echoed through temples, so gentle they did not disturb the gods, only reminded them that humans were listening. Greece knew music as medicine. The lyre, the aulos, they did not entertain. They aligned the soul. Plato wrote that certain modes of music could build character, or soften sorrow, or lull a restless mind into stillness. And in China, bells were tuned not by note, but by philosophy. Each chime, a piece of harmony. A single bronze bell could hold the memory of an empire. In the forests of the Congo, drums were not just instruments, they were voices. Log drums sent messages across miles, not songs, but syntax. A language of vibration. And everywhere mothers sang to children. No scroll preserved the melody. But it passed from breath to breath, from dusk to cradle, from one tired heart to the next. Music was not performed, it was offered. Let that music surround you now. Not with sound, but with memory. Let your pulse match an ancient rhythm and your breath hum with the lullaby of history. Before the feast, there was always fire. In Mesopotamia, bread rose slowly in clay ovens, flat and warm, dusted with sesame, shared between hands that knew both famine and plenty. They didn't bake only for themselves, but for the gods, for ancestors, for the neighbors who always knocked just before dusk. In ancient India, rice simmered with spice in bronze pots, a quiet alchemy of turmeric, cumin, and love. Meals began with prayer, not out of ritual, but gratitude, because food was sacred, because the earth had given again. In Rome, even emperors ate olives cured by peasants, a crust of bread dipped in oil, a fig pulled from the tree at noon. These were not indulgences, they were communion. And across the Mediterranean, wine was poured slowly, with hands that trembled or rejoiced, not to escape, but to remember. In China, a simple bowl of congee carried the warmth of generations. Soft rice, salted plum, steam curling into morning prayers. It was never about flavor, it was about presence, about giving the body a reason to stay. In sub-Saharan Africa, yams were mashed with rhythm, pounded in mortar to a beat older than drums. Children watched, learning not just how to cook, but how to wait. And everywhere, in every time, someone stirred a pot with hope. A mother boiled herbs for a cough. A father plucked wild greens from the edge of the woods. A child peeled fruit under the sun and licked the sweetness from their wrist. The taste of history is not spice or salt. It is care. It is the whisper of hunger answered by a warm bowl and a shared glance. Tonight, as you drift, let your breath be the rising dough, your heartbeat the crackle of flame. You are nourished by memory. You are full. Not all of history was war, worship, or work. There was laughter, too. Quiet, persistent, like a breeze that never asked permission. In the streets of ancient Thebes, children played with carved ivory animals and spun hoops made from bronze rings. Their games had no screens, no rules etched in manuals, just joy and the occasional scraped knee to remember it by. In Mesopotamia, people played the royal game of a board carved with rosettes, stones moved by fate and strategy. It was not only for entertainment. It was believed to predict fortunes, a game of gods disguised as pastime. The Greeks played knucklebones, tossing sheep ankle bones like dice. Some games were for gambling, others for laughter, and some for courting. Play was never just play. In China, kites soared over rice fields, crafted from bamboo and silk, shaped like dragons, birds, or poetry in flight. They weren't flown only by children. Even emperors reached upward. And in the Andes, families gathered for tlachtli, an ancient ball game played in courts lined with ritual. The rubber ball bounced between worlds, sport, ceremony, offering. In Rome, artists painted frescoes not of battle, but of dancers, of fruit sellers, of pets curled by their owners' feet. Leisure was not laziness, it was proof of life. Potters shaped clay into smiling figures. Weavers embroidered birds into tunics, just because they could. Someone once spent a whole day carving a single elephant from bone, not for gold, but for the quiet thrill of making something that would outlast their name. And when the work was done, they sat. They watched the fire. They hummed old songs whose lyrics were forgotten but whose comfort remained. Tonight, let that be enough. You do not need to produce. You do not need to win. Let rest be your game. Let peace be your prize. Long before books, before alphabets, people spoke in symbols, etchings on stone, paint on cave walls, lines carved into bone. In the caves of Lascaux, thousands of years before cities, hands left red stencils on stone. Bison leapt across ceilings, spirals danced beside deer. No one knows why. But everyone who sees them feels something stir. Symbols were not decoration. They were memory made visible. In the Indus Valley, seals were carved with animals and marks no one has yet translated. Tiny, precise, like whispers passed from one life to the next. In Celtic lands, knots wove endlessly, with no beginning or end. Infinity drawn into loops, worn on skin, carved on stone, to remind the living that nothing is ever truly lost. The Norse carved runes into wood and rock, each letter more than a sound, each a force, a tool, a quiet spell. To write was to shape reality. In Mesoamerica, the Maya watched the sky and saw time in its spinning. They built calendars not for scheduling but for sacred rhythm. Every number carried prophecy. Every day had a name, a meaning, a soul. Even dreams were symbols. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings kept dream interpreters close at hand. A lion in sleep might mean war. A river overflowing could promise harvest. They believed the night spoke truths the day could not hear. And across Polynesia, tattoos were maps of ancestry, of courage, of belonging. Skin became scroll, pain became permanence. Even now, symbols surround you, in the way the wind curves leaves, in the shape of your breath as it slows. Let your sleep be written in ancient language. Let your rest mean something beyond words. Time in the ancient world was not a line. It was a circle, a breath, a season remembered, not counted. In Babylon, priests climbed ziggurats not just to pray, but to watch the heavens. Stars marked time long before sundials. The planet Venus appearing and vanishing, set calendars in motion, guided harvests, and foretold the rise of kings. The Egyptians measured hours by the shadow of an obelisk, the flow of water from a vessel. Even time moved with grace, with silence. Their calendar followed the Nile, its rising, its retreat, its gift of silt and rebirth. New Year began not in winter, but when the river rose, because the earth had spoken. In the Andes, stones were aligned so precisely that the sun pierced temple windows only on the solstice. Time was not a number, it was a light at a certain angle, on a certain day. The Maya built pyramids that cast serpents in shadow during equinox. A dance of sunlight and stone, reminding all who watched that even the gods moved with precision. In Japan, farmers followed the 24 solar terms, tiny shifts in sun and wind that marked when to plant rice, when to wait, when to prepare for frost. Time was not a master, it was a guide. People rose with roosters, not alarms. They listened to birds, to frost on the ground, to the moon swelling over sea, and at night before sleep they told stories not to pass time, but to honor it. So tonight, as minutes pass unseen, remember, you are not running out of time, you are resting inside it. Long ago, before electric moons and restless screens, sleep arrived like a tide, slow, inevitable, welcomed. In ancient Greece, they believed dreams were sent from the gods. Temples of Asclepius invited the ill to sleep in sacred chambers. There, wrapped in incense and chants, they hoped to dream their healing. It was called incubation. Not just rest, but revelation. In Egypt, dreams were recorded on papyrus, analyzed by priests who knew that what the mind whispered at night might guide the waking day. They built quiet into their evenings, cool baths, oil for the skin, stories passed in soft voices. And when sleep came, they did not fight it. They let it fold over them like a cotton shroud. In Japan, futons were rolled onto mats, bodies curled like commas. Not a bed, but a pause, a respectful silence between days. In medieval Europe, people often slept in two parts. First sleep, then waking, to pray, to talk quietly, to think. Then second sleep, a return to the cradle of dreams. There was no shame in waking. The night was not lost time. It was a realm all its own. And in Africa, beneath starry blankets of open sky, families slept near fires, stories still glowing in their chests as crickets stitched lullabies into the dark. To sleep was not to disappear. It was to return. To the self, to the rhythm of ancestors, to the space where soul and story intertwine. And now you are here. Not in Babylon or Thebes, but beneath your own quiet stars ready to drift. Let the weight of the world slip from your shoulders. Let your breath slow like the turning of an old calendar. History is still watching, but it asks nothing of you now. Just rest. Just dream. Let the ancient world hold you softly, gently until morning comes.